In the quiet stillness of an early morning in East Side Detroit, a young black boy rode his old bike through the worn streets, delivering groceries to help his mother and little sister have one more full meal. Then suddenly, he spotted an elderly man on his porch, nearly crushed beneath a pile of fallen wood. Without hesitation, the boy rushed in to help, knowing it would cost him part of his wages, maybe even the only job he had. What he didn't know was that the man he saved was the father of a wealthy CEO, and that single act of kindness would change his family's future forever. Before we dive into his story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The sun hadn't even reached its highest point, but already Detroit was sweltering in a heat that wrapped around the city like a damp wool blanket. It clung to the faded bricks of old apartment buildings, seeped into the cracked sidewalks, and settled deep into every breath drawn in the West Side neighborhoods. The air smelled of tar, dry earth, and the faint trace of oil rising from the roads. It was the kind of heat that made the world move slower, made everything feel a little heavier. Terence Moore wiped the back of his neck with the hem of his shirt as he coasted down Tuxedo Street, his knees pumping lazily at the pedals of his scuffed-up Schwinn. The crate strapped to the rear frame bounced with every pothole. Inside were 2 full grocery orders, paper bags filled with discount cereal, frozen chicken, and off-brand shampoo, all purchased by folks too tired or too old to make it to the store. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept the lights on, most days. He was cutting it close. The app on his phone had buzzed 3 times now, warning him that his delivery window was closing. Another late trip and his rating would drop. Again, fewer orders meant fewer tips, and that meant Mama would have to skip another lunch so Laela could eat. He clenched his jaw. Not today. Then, just as he turned onto a quieter street, a row of aging houses lined with brittle hedges and crooked fences, he spotted something that made his stomach twist. A house near the corner, sagging at the roofline, its porch shaded by the heavy arms of an overgrown maple tree. In the front yard, scattered across the patchy grass, were wide wooden planks and old tools. An elderly man stood at the top of the porch steps, gripping the edge of a long board, maybe 10 feet in length, and struggling to lower it down onto a sawhorse. His face was contorted in pain, his arms trembling. One wrong shift, and that board was going to fall. Fast, hard, and directly onto his legs. Terence dropped his bike without a second thought. The crate toppled to the sidewalk, apples rolling into the gutter. "Sir!" he shouted, heart racing as he sprinted across the lawn. "Let it go!" The old man looked up, startled, but his reaction was too slow. The board had already started to tilt. Terence lunged. In one motion he threw his body between the man and the falling plank, catching the bulk of its weight across his left shoulder. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, but he managed to guide it down, his knees buckling as it hit the grass. The old man collapsed onto the porch rail, panting, one hand clutching his chest. "Good Lord," he rasped. "Thought I was about to be sawdust." Terence winced, rubbing his shoulder. "You all right?" The man nodded slowly, though his face was pale under the shadow of his straw hat. "Yeah, thanks to you." They stood there in the quiet hum of the heat. A fly buzzed somewhere near the porch light. Far off, a dog barked twice and fell silent. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Terence finally stepped back and looked around. The yard was cluttered with boards and tools, half a ladder leaning against the porch, a rusted hammer glinting beside a pile of screws. A workbench stood crooked under the eaves, like someone had tried to build something but had run out of energy halfway through. "You doing all this yourself?" Terence asked, glancing back at the man. The old man gave a tired chuckle, the kind that seemed to come from behind his ribs. "Trying to. Not going well, clearly." "You live here?" The man nodded, easing himself down onto the top step. "Name's Walter. Walter Bishop. Just moved back, actually. This was my family's house when I was a boy. My father built most of this porch with his bare hands. After my wife passed, my son tried to convince me to sell, buy some fancy place in the suburbs with crown moldings and granite counters. He scoffed. But I told him no. This place has history, got soul. I wanted to fix it myself." Terence looked around again, at the peeling paint, the drooping gutters, the cracked window panes. It did have soul, but also years of neglect, and Walter, thin, sweating, breathless, Didn't look like he could carry a gallon of milk, let alone rebuild a porch. "Why not just hire someone?" Terrace asked, already knowing the answer. Walter tilted his head, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Because there's a difference between having something done for you and doing it with your own hands. I'm not ready to let go of that just yet." Silence fell again, heavier this time. Terrence's eyes drifted to his bike, still lying sideways in the street, groceries spilled. His phone buzzed again. He didn't even have to check. The delivery window had passed. He was going to get flagged, maybe even suspended from the app for the week. He exhaled slowly. "You got more boards to move?" Walter raised an eyebrow. "That wasn't a hint for me to pay you, was it?" Terrence grinned. "No, sir, just figured you might kill yourself out here if I don't stick around." A pause. Then Walter laughed. A deep, scratchy sound full of disbelief. "All right, then. If you're offering—" The next hour passed under the unforgiving sun. Terrence hauled boards, swept debris, helped drill supports for the railing. Walter gave quiet instructions, sometimes pausing to catch his breath or lean heavily on a post. Sweat soaked through Terrence's shirt, and blisters formed where he gripped the wood too tight, but he didn't complain. He didn't think about the lost delivery or the money that wouldn't come in tonight. He thought about the way Walter's eyes softened every time he looked at the house. And when they were done, when the last board was stacked neatly in the back and the porch no longer looked like it might collapse under the weight of memory, Walter reached out a weathered hand. "You saved an old fool twice today," he said. "Least I can do is remember your name." Terrence shook his hand. "Terrence Moore." Walter smiled, slow and full of something real. "If you ever need anything, Terrence, you come knock. This porch might not look like much, but it owes you." Terrence nodded, backing away, his legs heavy with heat and fatigue. He mounted his bike and gave a final glance back at the man sitting on the steps of his past. As he pedaled away, the notification hit his phone. He didn't even need to look to know order canceled, rating dropped, earnings cut. Still, he smiled to himself. Something about today felt different. He hadn't earned much, but maybe, just maybe, he'd earned something more. Terrence's legs felt like soaked concrete as he pushed his bike up the cracked sidewalk toward the narrow brown house he called home. The late afternoon heat had taken on a drier bite, and the sky hung low and yellow with humidity, threatening storms that might never come. He could feel the sting in his shoulders from lifting boards, and the dull ache in his palms where splinters still itched beneath the skin. His t-shirt clung to his back, damp and stained, and the crate on the back of his bike was lighter now, not because the groceries had been delivered, but because half of them had been spoiled by the sun or bruised from the fall. He hadn't made it to the next order. The app had flagged him as a no-show, and a cold little notification had popped up just 10 minutes ago. Account performance under review. Possible suspension. It hit him harder than expected, not because he hadn't seen it coming, but because he knew what it meant. When he opened the front door, the familiar scent of warm rice and beans greeted him, along with the sound of his mother's voice. "Terrence?" Carmen Moore's head peeked out from the kitchen, her apron smudged, a worn rag slung over her shoulder. Her eyes instantly scanned his face. "You're late, baby. I was getting worried." Terrence forced a tired smile and set his bike by the door, its tires thudding softly against the hardwood floor. "Yeah, sorry. Got caught up." Carmen stepped into the living room, her expression shifting from concern to careful calculation. "Caught up how?" He hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen table where a few unpaid bills sat like silent sentinels. One of the orders, spilled, took longer than expected. Her brow furrowed. "And the tips?" He looked down. Didn't get that far. The silence stretched. Not angry, just tired. Tired in that way only a mother can be. Tired of stretching pennies, of rationing laundry soap, of making dinner without asking who's still hungry afterward. Carmen walked past him, wiped her hands on the rag and exhaled deeply through her nose. "Well," she said softly, "we'll figure it out. We always do." From the hallway the sound of feet pattering broke the heaviness. Lila appeared, her 7-year-old face lighting up as soon as she saw him. "Gabby!" she called, mispronouncing her brother's name the way she always did, arms open wide. Terence knelt down as she crashed into him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I missed you," she said. "I missed you too, Squirt." He tried to keep his voice light, ruffling her hair as if everything was normal, as if the weight pressing on his chest wasn't real. "I helped Mommy sweep today," she announced proudly, "and I folded the towels. Even the big ones." Terence smiled. "That's what I like to hear. I'm going to have to start calling you boss lady soon." Layla giggled and danced away toward the kitchen, leaving Terence alone with Carmen again. She leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, her gaze softening now that Layla was out of earshot. "You want to tell me what really happened out there?" she asked. Terence hesitated, debating whether the truth would help or just make things worse. But the image of Walter flashed in his mind, his trembling hands, his breathless laugh, the way he'd looked up at Terence like he mattered. "There was this old man," he began slowly, eyes on the floor. "He was trying to move this big board on his porch. I thought he was going to get crushed, so I stopped." Carmen's mouth opened, then closed. "I stayed, helped him move the rest of the boards, clean up his yard a little. I know I missed my delivery window. I know I shouldn't have." "You should have," Carmen interrupted gently. Her voice caught him off guard. "You should have, Terence." He looked up. She wasn't angry. She was proud. Sad, but proud. Her face was lined with the exhaustion of too many double shifts, but her eyes were full of something he rarely saw. Admiration. "You did something kind," she said, walking over to place her hand on his cheek. "This world doesn't pay you for that, but it should." Her hand lingered for a second longer than usual, then dropped as she turned toward the stove. "Now come eat before it gets cold. We may not have much, but beans taste better when they're hot." Terence sat at the table in silence, chewing slowly, the weight of the day finally settling into his bones. He'd lost a day's pay, maybe more depending on what the app decided. But even as the numbers floated like storm clouds in the back of his mind, he couldn't forget Walter's voice. "This porch might not look like much, but it owes you." That night, lying on the worn couch mattress in the front room, Terence stared at the ceiling, his thoughts moving like smoke. He should have felt regret. He should have felt panic about the money. But what he felt instead was strange, quiet clarity. He had done something good, something decent. And even if it didn't matter to the world, it mattered to him. And though he didn't know it yet, it mattered to someone else, too. Miles away, in that old house shaded by the big maple tree, an old man sat on his newly cleared porch with a rotary phone in his hand, dialing a number he hadn't called in years. "Marcus," he said, his voice gravelly but urgent. "I need you to meet someone." The next morning broke slow and gray, with clouds hanging low over the rooftops, like the sky hadn't made up its mind whether to rain or just hover heavy all day. Terence sat by the window, his elbows resting on the chipped sill, watching the street as the neighborhood stirred awake. His body ached in all the places hard labor always remembered, and yet his mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. He kept checking his phone, hoping, maybe foolishly, that the app had reversed the penalty. But the red notice still blinked at the top of the screen. Account under review, temporary suspension in effect. Just like that, his only income was gone. Carmen moved behind him in the kitchen, quiet, her slippers shuffling against the linoleum as she stirred a pot of grits and tried not to let her worry show. Layla hummed to herself at the table, coloring on the back of a grocery receipt with a green marker that had nearly dried up. The knock came soft but certain. 3 solid raps. Not the hurried beat of a neighbor or the bored tap of a delivery. It was deliberate. Terence's head turned, brow creasing. No one knocked on their door unless something was wrong. Carmen stepped toward the door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Stay back," she murmured without looking at Terence. She opened the door cautiously, only to freeze in the frame. There, standing on the porch in a tailored charcoal gray suit, was a man who looked like he belonged on a magazine cover instead of a broken Detroit stoop. Late 40s, sharp features, not a hair out of place. Behind him, parked half on the sidewalk and gleaming like sin itself, was a black limousine with tinted windows. "Good morning," the man said, his voice smooth but confident. "I'm looking for Terence Moore." Carmen's eyes narrowed instinctively. "Who's asking?" "I'm Marcus Bishop," he said, extending a business card she didn't take. "My father, Walter Bishop, told me about a young man who helped him yesterday. Saved him, really." Terence had already stepped into the hallway, heart pounding, watching the exchange with caution. He walked up behind his mother, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, Ma. That's him." Marcus's gaze shifted, meeting Terence's eyes. He smiled, genuinely it seemed. "You're even younger than my father said." Terence blinked, confused. Is he okay?" "He's fine. Sore but grateful." Marcus glanced around the street, then back to Terence. "He told me about what you did, said you put your own work aside, risked your time, maybe your money, just to help a stranger. That you stayed even when he couldn't pay you. That means something." Terence felt his stomach twist. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said quickly, "or money." "I know," Marcus replied. "That's why I'm here," he gestured to the limo. "Would you mind if we talked, somewhere more private? My driver can bring you back." Terence looked at his mother. Her face was stone still, protective, unreadable. Then she nodded. Once, slow. "I'm coming with him." Marcus didn't hesitate. Of course. The ride was quiet at first. The leather interior smelled like wealth. New car scent, subtle cologne, air conditioning that didn't rattle. Terence sat stiffly beside his mother, who hadn't unclenched her hands since they left the house. Marcus, across from them, studied the boy carefully. "You remind me of my father," he said finally. "When he was younger. He built that house with his own hands, brick by brick. It's why he refused to leave it, even when I begged him. Said the city forgot men like him, and he wasn't about to let his legacy rot without a fight." Terence met his gaze. "I think I understand that." Marcus smiled faintly. "I think you do." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out 2 folders, sliding them across the table. "This is why I came. One is for you. It's a job offer. Part-time assistant with my logistics company, after school hours. We're opening a new youth apprenticeship program, and I want you to be the first name on the list." Terence's eyes widened. "A job? With you?" Marcus nodded. "But more than that, I spoke with some partners. If you're interested. There's a scholarship program we can enroll you in. It's competitive, but your story, your heart, that's what they look for. Full tuition, private school, mentorship." Terence was frozen, speechless. Then Marcus turned to Carmen, his voice softening. "And I know how hard it is raising kids alone. My company's hiring at our downtown office. We need good people. Someone to manage scheduling, front desk work. It comes with benefits, health care, stability." Carmen's lips parted, but no sound came out. "I'm not here out of charity," Marcus added quickly. "I'm here because you raised a boy who made my father believe in people again. He hasn't said that in a long time." Silence settled like a held breath. Terence looked at his mother, eyes glassy, unsure whether to trust what he was hearing. Carmen finally spoke, her voice breaking just slightly. "What if this is too good to be true?" Marcus leaned forward. "Then let me prove it's not." And in that moment, Terence felt something shift. Not in the world, but in himself. Like maybe this wasn't just luck. Maybe this was the beginning of everything he thought he'd never have a shot at. Maybe, just maybe, helping someone when no one was watching had opened a door that would never have been built otherwise. The next morning felt different. The air, still thick with late summer heat, carried a strange charge. Like the world had shifted ever so slightly, and Terence could feel it humming beneath his skin. He woke before dawn, not to the harsh vibration of his delivery app, but to silence, thick and unfamiliar. There were no orders to chase today, no timer counting down his worth by the second. He dressed slowly, buttoning the cleanest shirt he owned, one of the few without a frayed collar. Carmen had pressed it last night, carefully, without a word, but her hands lingered on the fabric a moment longer than usual. Now it smelled faintly of lemon starch and hope. The walk to the building Marcus had told them about took 20 minutes, give or take. Terence pushed his bike beside him the whole way, not riding. He needed the movement, the time to breathe. Carmen walked with him, silent at first, her purse clutched tightly in one hand, the morning sun turning the whites of her knuckles pink. When they reached the office, Terence paused in front of the glass doors. It looked too polished, too clean. He could see his reflection, warped slightly by the curve of the door, and for a second he didn't recognize himself. Inside, a woman with tightly coiled curls and a smile that felt real met them at the reception desk. "You must be Terence and Miss Moore," she said, rising to her feet. "Mr. Bishop is expecting you." Her name tag read Nina. Her voice was warm, not the clipped tone people used when they were pretending to be polite. That mattered more than Terence could explain. She led them down a quiet hallway, walls lined with framed photographs. Teams of workers, citywide projects, clean logos stamped on trucks, warehouses, communities. Terence noticed a plaque on the wall, built from the ground up, one honest hand at a time. It didn't feel like a slogan. It felt like a promise. Marcus was waiting in a small conference room, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, sipping coffee from a plain white mug. When he stood to greet them, he didn't reach for a handshake first. He looked Terence in the eye, then at Carmen, and said simply, "I'm glad you came." They sat. Papers were passed, explained carefully, nothing hidden in small print. No contracts sprung as surprise. Carmen read every page, her eyes scanned like they were hunting for traps, like years of being burned had taught her that fine print always meant a door that slammed shut. But there was nothing like that here. "This position," Marcus said, gesturing toward Terence's folder, "is built to teach. It's not just about errands or busy work. You'll shadow real team leads, handle small logistics, learn the systems. You do well, we'll open more doors. But you start at your pace." Terence swallowed hard. "What if I mess up?" "Then we teach," Marcus replied, without blinking. "Messing up is part of growth. What matters is how you respond." Then he turned to Carmen. "The admin job is yours if you want it. Training provided. Paid hourly, with benefits. I don't offer favors, I offer opportunities. To people who deserve them." Carmen stared at him. Her mouth was set in a straight line, but her eyes were full of something Terence hadn't seen in a long time. Belief was a fragile thing. It didn't come back easily once it'd been bruised, but maybe this time it had room to stretch again. Marcus reached for one final envelope. "And this," he said, sliding it across the table, "is a scholarship package. If Terence accepts the job and if his sister qualifies, we can help her too. School tuition, supplies, tutoring support." The room went quiet. Terence couldn't breathe for a second. His hand shook as he picked up the envelope, the paper cool against his fingertips. Layla. He thought of her in hand-me-down shoes 2 sizes too big, reading old library books until the pages peeled. He thought of how she looked at him like he could fix anything. His voice broke when he said it. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus sat back, his expression calm. "Because someone helped me once, when they had no reason to. That help changed everything. I'm just passing it forward." Carmen's breath hitched. She reached for Terence's hand under the table, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't to guide him. It was to steady herself. Terence looked between the folder, the envelope, and Marcus. His voice was quiet but firm. "All right," he said. "I'm ready." And just like that, the door didn't just open. It stayed open, and Terence stepped through. The days that followed unfolded like a film Terence never thought he'd be cast in. Each morning he woke early, dressed in the button-up shirt Carmen pressed the night before, and rode his bike down smoother, cleaner streets toward the glass building that now bore his name on a visitor's badge. The first few days were overwhelming, navigating hallways full of strangers in pressed slacks, handling paperwork he didn't fully understand, answering phones where his voice always cracked on the first word, but each time he stumbled, someone was there to guide him. Nina from reception always smiled when he passed, offering a quiet thumbs up. Mr. Lewis, his supervisor, had a gruff voice but gentle eyes and walked him through the logistics systems without judgment. Slowly, the fear in Terence's chest was replaced by something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Possibility. Meanwhile, Carmen started her new job 2 floors up, wearing clothes she hadn't touched in years, the ones she'd saved in case someone ever looked at her like she was more than just another tired single mother. She learned fast, typing faster than she thought her fingers could move, answering phones with a tone that demanded respect. By the end of her first week, Marcus passed her desk, looked her square in the eye, and said, "Your son has your fire." Carmen didn't respond aloud, but she smiled, and that smile stayed with her all day. But the moment everything shifted came at the end of Terence's first full week. He had just finished sorting a series of shipment logs when Mr. Lewis handed him a new file. "Think you're ready for this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Terence took the folder, opening it carefully. Inside were documents from a previous shipment, the same one from earlier that week. Something about the numbers didn't feel right. He scanned the delivery codes again and again. His gut twisted. "Sir," he said slowly, "I think these 2 pallets were misrouted. This one says Eastside Depot, but the order number matches our West Side route." Lewis leaned over, his brow furrowed. "Damn, you're right. If we hadn't caught this, we'd be looking at a fine, and a big one. Like Luca at Rourke." And Terence's heart pounded. "I didn't mean to." Lewis held up a hand. "No, you meant to. You were paying attention. That's rare." He paused, then added quietly, "Especially around here. Most people don't expect the kid from the delivery app to spot a mistake that seasoned staff miss." Terence blinked. He didn't know how to respond to that. Later that afternoon, Marcus called him into his office. The air was cooler in there, the lights softer, the walls lined with books that looked expensive even when they weren't open. Marcus stood by the window, looking out over the city. "I heard what you caught," he said without turning around. "You saved us thousands, but more than that. You showed you care about the details. That matters." Terence shifted in the chair. "I just didn't want to mess it up." Marcus finally turned, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "That mindset? That's the difference between someone just doing a job and someone building a future." He walked over to his desk, picked up an envelope and handed it to Terence. "Open it." Inside was a revised contract. Higher hourly pay, a permanent part-time position, and a letter of recommendation for the scholarship program. Terence looked up, stunned. "Why?" "Because I believe in building people the same way my father built that porch. With patience, with time, and with someone who gives a damn." Marcus's voice lowered. "You earned this, Terence. You didn't wait for life to hand you anything. You showed up when no one was watching, and now people are—" Terence sat there for a long moment, fingers tightening around the envelope. His throat felt thick. He thought of Leola coloring at the kitchen table, of Carmen wiping tears before she let herself smile, of the day he helped Walter, thinking it was just one moment. But it hadn't been just one. It was the beginning. "I won't let you down," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Marcus nodded. "I know." And as Terence left the office that day, the Detroit sky breaking open with a late summer rain, he didn't run for shelter. He let it hit him. He let it wash over his shoulders, his back, his hands, the same hands that had once caught a falling plank of wood, now holding the weight of something far more powerful, a future. The weeks rolled by like the steady rhythm of a train, and slowly the routine that once seemed impossible became the new normal. Each day after school, Terence rode his bike through streets that used to feel like limits, but now felt like beginnings. He learned to navigate spreadsheets, mastered inventory codes, and even helped design a small routing improvement that got mentioned in a staff meeting. Mr. Lewis had started calling him Hawkeyes, and even Nina at reception saved him the good coffee when she could. He wasn't invisible anymore. He belonged. Carmen, now confident at the front desk, moved with purpose, her voice crisp on calls, her laughter no longer something rare but daily. The paycheck wasn't huge, but it brought dignity, stability. She started putting money aside, just a little, For emergencies, for Leola's school shoes, for a future that wasn't built on barely surviving. One Thursday afternoon, after a full shift, Terence was getting ready to leave when Marcus stopped him in the hallway. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Pride, yes, but also something heavier. "Got a second?" he asked. Terence followed him into the corner office, where the city spread out behind the glass like a dream in motion. Marcus didn't speak right away. Instead, he handed Terence a sealed envelope and nodded toward the chair. Terence sat, heart already climbing. "What's this?" he asked. "Your scholarship results," Marcus said simply. Terence's fingers trembled as he peeled it open, eyes scanning the first few lines. Then everything inside him went quiet. Full tuition, supplies, academic mentoring, transport stipends, the whole package. His chest tightened and he looked up, barely able to speak. "It's real." Marcus smiled. "Of course it is. You earned every word in that letter." But that wasn't all. Marcus reached into a second folder and pulled out a smaller envelope. "And this is for your sister. We reviewed her records. Bright girl, stronger than she knows. She qualifies too." Terence's breath caught in his throat. "Lila?" Marcus nodded. They're going to the same school, together, safe, supported. Terence stood slowly, as if afraid he'd break the moment by moving too fast. His eyes burned. He turned toward the window, not wanting Marcus to see the tears he hadn't planned on shedding. But Marcus stood beside him, not saying a word, just letting the silence hold the weight of what this meant. That night, Terence walked home through the dusky quiet, sky streaked in orange and purple. He didn't ride his bike. He needed to feel the ground beneath his feet. When he stepped through the front door, Carmen was folding laundry, humming softly. Leila sat cross-legged on the floor, cutting stars from old cereal boxes. Terence dropped his bag and just stood there, looking at them, his family, his reasons. Carmen noticed the envelope in his hand first. "Well?" she asked, standing up. He nodded slowly, voice thick. "We're in. All of us." Carmen's hand flew to her mouth. Leila jumped up, still holding a half-cut star. "Even me?" "Especially you, Squirt," Terence whispered, pulling her into a hug as Carmen wrapped her arms around them both. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, holy, raw. A moment that settled into their bones and whispered, "This is the start of something better." In the days that followed, word spread around the neighborhood. People started asking what had happened, why the boy who used to deliver groceries in silence was now walking with his head high, tucked in a clean shirt, his little sister laughing beside him. Some asked questions with curiosity, others with doubt, but it didn't matter, because the truth was this: kindness had built a bridge, and someone, finally, had walked across it. On the morning of their first day at the new school, Terence stood in front of the mirror adjusting his collar. Carmen stood behind him, hand on his shoulder, tears in her eyes. Leila twirled in her new uniform, beaming. As they stepped outside, Walter was waiting at the edge of the sidewalk, leaning on his cane, his porch now freshly painted. The boards straight and solid. Terence walked over. "You didn't have to come." Walter chuckled, eyes twinkling. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." They shook hands, 2 generations meeting in a silent understanding that went beyond words. As the sun rose behind them, lighting up the cracked sidewalks and quiet streets of their neighborhood, Terence knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the part where the music changes. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was rising. And for the first time in his life, the future didn't look like a wall, it looked like a door. And this time, he had the key. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.